Please join me in welcoming Piper Kerman.
The animals, trap, 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 till the cages fall. The cages fall.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for that warm NACo welcome. And I want to welcome you to Columbus, Ohio, which is currently my hometown. I have been here, yeah. Go Bucks. I've been here for about 2.5 years, and I hope that you are enjoying this beautiful, warm, friendly city for all it's worth. I know you're working hard, but I hope you're also enjoying our amazing restaurants, and when the weather's good, maybe you'll get a jog or a stroll around this pretty, pretty city. I've really enjoyed being here, and I am delighted to be here with all of you because counties are the most important players when it comes to the criminal justice system and when it comes to having a more fair, more just, more effective, and more efficient criminal justice system. So I'm going to talk about all those things, and there's a lot to talk about, so stay with me. Right, Orange is the New Black, my year in a women's prison. Let's go. Why am I standing before you? I'm standing before you today because, well, the story in some ways starts in February of 2004. I drove in February 2004 with my then boyfriend, Larry, to the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution to turn myself in, to begin serving a prison sentence. More than a decade before, I had committed a crime, a serious crime. I had been involved in a relationship with someone who was involved in narcotics, and I had carried a bag of money from Chicago to Brussels. Now, I was very, very fortunate. I was fortunate in a lot of ways. I was fortunate because I was the product of a really good public school education. I'm from Massachusetts, best public schools in the nation. I was fortunate because I'd had the opportunity to go to college. I was fortunate because that college education was something that no strip search could ever take away from me. By the way, it's a women's college, the first women's institution in which I was held. And yeah, and I was fortunate because I came from a safe and stable home where violence wasn't present, and I had been able to navigate through much of my life with some success. That big mistake that I had made when I was 22 years old, had not tripped me up so badly that I had not been able to go forward and work and be a productive citizen. I had managed to get my life back together independently. That said, in 1998, 2 federal agents knocked on my door in New York, where I was living then and working, and let me know that I was going to be held accountable for that crime that I had committed years before. Ultimately, it was 2004 when I actually entered prison gates, and I was scared. I don't know how many of you have spent time in your local jail or in a state prison, but they're scary places for a variety of reasons, but most of all because our ideas and our images of prisons and of prisoners are of uncontrollably violent people filling up uncontrollably violent places. And as I looked at that vicious triple-layer razor wire fence that I was about to walk through, I was scared. And I will say the 2 correctional officers who transformed me from Piper Kerman into 111-87424 did not do a lot to make me less scared. And then I was put into general population, into the dorm where I would live and serve out my sentence. And I was surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of women, and I knew none of them. But I saw right away I was wearing a different uniform than they were wearing, and on my feet were these little canvas slippers, and on their feet were these big black steel-toed shoes. And women began to approach me in their big black steel-toed shoes, and I was scared. And they said things like, "Do you need some toothpaste? Do you need a pair of shower shoes? There is a wicked foot fungus in there. Do you need me to make you a cup of instant coffee because you are quaking in your slippers? Look, Kerman, Today is a really bad day. Tomorrow will be a little bit better. And so what I was experiencing was something that I would then witness hundreds and hundreds of times over the course of that year in prison. It was this phenomenon of the welcome wagon, where prisoners would step up when there was a new person on the unit and make sure that she had those very basic fundamental things that you need to survive your first few days in prison, because your first few days in prison are baffling and you don't have some of those very, very basic things. And that's true whether you're in a federal prison or in a city jail or a county jail. It is this terrifying learning curve for the first person for the first time who's doing time there. Now, you may be looking at the fuzzy photocopy of my prison ID. There I am, 111-87424, not looking my best. And rarely is anyone looking their best in their mugshot, right, or in their prison ID. Those are bad days. That thing that you see above it, that sort of weird, like scripty, pretty thing that says my name, that was made for me by Star. Now, Star was a young woman who lived about 2 feet away from me in the dorm that I was assigned to live in, my permanent housing assignment. And she was sort of the resident artist of the unit. She loved to draw. She was a really spectacular artist. And one of the things that she would draw were the name tags that we were required to have on our bunks. And so she made this name tag for me. And each and every name tag she made was scripty and fancy and feminine and a little bit different. Every single one was unique. And to me, this was a very powerful signal of welcome. It said, hey, we know that you are not just 111-87424. We know that you are Piper, you're Kerman. We know that you're a woman. We know that you're one of us now. And for those of you who are straining to see, that is a kitten sticker. I did not see that coming. And I don't mean to suggest for a minute that a prison or a jail is a nice place to live, because any of you who are familiar with a local county jail or city jail knows that that's not true, right? Prisons and jails in this country are built very intentionally to be harsh, difficult places to live, places of deprivation, places of scarcity. Which fosters a lot of the conflict and sometimes violence that you find inside of those institutions. And yet, kitten sticker, right? Because the punishment of prison is supposed to be that scarcity and harshness. And yet, kitten sticker. So I spent about 11 months in that minimum security federal facility, and the women that I met there schooled me, and some of them befriended me, and they helped me to survive in ways both very ordinary and everyday, and also, enormous, like when, a loved one of mine died. Like, those were the people who were actually able and there to comfort me. And I left that prison a very different person in a lot of ways because of the women that I did time with, and I am eternally grateful to them. I learned things from them because of my connection to them, not because of the cage that we shared. Now, I did things a little back-assward, because at the very end of my time being incarcerated, I landed in this strange triangular building. I don't know if there's anyone here from Chicago, Cook County, or anywhere else in the Illinois area, but you might recognize this building. This is the federal jail in Chicago, Illinois. This is where I finished up my sentence. And this is the worst place I've ever been in my life. It's really an interesting phenomenon that county jails and city jails are actually more difficult settings in which to be incarcerated than most state prisons or federal prisons. Many people are, on the outside are surprised by that. It's sort of counterintuitive, but you all know that the resources that are available for county jails and for city jails are insufficient for the demands that are put upon those institutions, right? And there are really different challenges that face jail settings than state prisons or federal prisons face. That place, that prison, that jail was an awful, awful place. It had a solitary confinement unit which was only used for men. And so if women messed up, if you had an infraction, if you were a female inmate in that jail, they didn't put you in the shoe in that building, they sent you to the Cook County Jail. And I've never been to the Cook County Jail, but I was assured by some of the women who were local that I didn't want to go there, and I believed them. So what echoed through my head as I was navigating that difficult situation was the voice of a woman I would become very close with back in Danbury. This, of course, was the formidable prisoner who ran the kitchen with an iron fist. For those of you who are fans of the Netflix series, that might sound familiar. And she had been incarcerated for a long time, and she had been in a lot of different facilities. And she used to lean back sometimes back in that minimum security setting and say, ugh, you girls, you don't know what real prison is. Well, she was talking about the conditions that I experienced in that jail. And it was there that it was truly brought home to me what a powerful impact the conditions of confinement will have on a person's mental, emotional, and psychological well-being. Because those 6 weeks that I spent there were the most difficult period of my incarceration. And it was only in that jail setting that I began to lose hope, even though I knew rationally that I was very, very close to going home. And that's something to keep in mind when we think about the conditions that we put people into, is that they will have this profound deleterious effect on people's mental, emotional, and psychological well-being, right? So Orange is the New Black, I was so fortunate. I served a short sentence. I served 13 months of a 15-month sentence. I came home in 2005. Almost everyone I knew, to the last man and woman, wanted to know as much as I was willing to share about that experience. I chose to write the book about, this sort of shameful, immoral, bad choice I made and all of the consequences that went along with it, because I hoped that the reader might come away with a different idea about who is in prison in this country or jail, why are they there, what are the pathways that people follow into prison, what are the choices that potentially land them there, and what is life really like behind the wire. I hoped that people would come away with new and different ideas about that if they read the book. And people ask about the title sometimes. Orange is the New Black, what does that mean? Well, obviously it's a somewhat sarcastic joke about the notorious prison jumpsuit. The idea that that could ever be fashionable is, of course, ridiculous. However, it's intended to signal this is not just a book about prison, this is a book about women, right? And there is another meaning to the title, and that has to do with this number, 650%. So what is 650%? This is the percentage increase in the incarceration of women in this country over the last 4 decades. That's a big number. It's a big, big increase. During the same time period, the incarceration rate for men increased by 400%, which is also a really big number as well. However, women have been the fastest growing part of the prison and jail population in this country for decades. And I thought, well, the title is also intended to signal that the person wearing that orange jumpsuit is more likely than ever to be a woman. I think that when we think about female incarceration, it gives us a particularly important window on American ideas about punishment, right? So America is very well known around the world for our commitment to harsh punishment. And when we think about harsh punishment, we might think about the death penalty. Or we might think about juvenile life without parole. We are the only nation in the world that sentences children to die in prison, right? But when we look at the incarceration of women, I think we see a much more ordinary and everyday example of harsh punishment, because juvenile life without parole or the death penalty are obviously associated with very, very serious crimes. But 2/3 of women who are behind bars in jail or in prison are there for drug offenses or for property crimes, and often very, very low-level ones. So this incredible increase in the punishment of women with prison or jail is something that we have to take a hard look at, I think, in this country and ask, is that harsh punishment getting us the results that we want and that we need as a nation. So who are these women that we lock up hand over fist? Well, there are women like Kerman. Kerman is a woman I know from New York, where I used to live. I serve on the board of the Women's Prison Association, which is the longest serving organization focused on criminal justice involved women and their families. And it's been around since the 1840s, right? And it's funny, when you look at our log books, we have these beautiful log books from like way back in the day, 1860. You notice, first of all, unbelievable penmanship. Really, it is beautiful. But then when you look at the penmanship, you notice that all the names are Irish. And it's important for us to always remember that prisons and jails are tools of social control operated by governments, whether it's the federal government, the state government, or local government, and that that social control is never really been shared by all members of the community, right? It's always been directed at certain people in certain communities at certain times in our history. So Kerman has been arrested about 100 times in her life. She was what is sometimes called a frequent flyer, right? And always for incredibly low-level stuff like drug possession or prostitution. And it turns out that, you know, the change that Kerman needed, and she needed to make changes for herself and for her family, because she has a family, those changes did not involve a cage. They involved other kinds of interventions, other kinds of help for Kerman to be able to really transform her life. We launched a program in New York with the Women's Prison Association in cooperation with the city district attorney's offices and certain courtrooms called Justice Home. And Justice Home is a program that allows women who are facing at least a year in prison or jail to potentially stay at home, be held accountable for their offense, but also get help making the changes they need. And every woman is different, right? Some of those women have mental health issues. Some of them need parenting skills. Some of them have substance use disorder. Everybody's a little bit different, but the program works really well, incredibly well. The results are fantastic. And the program costs about $18,000 per woman. And of course, that impacts an entire family because all the women who go through the program have kids. In New York State, it costs about $60,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. If that woman has 2 children who enter the foster care system, suddenly that number has annually climbed to about $130,000 a year. So you do the math, right? Another reason to think and to care about these women, and also all of these women have male counterparts, this is Marietta and her daughter, is the impact that jail and prison have on children and families. Because it's important for us all to know that the sentence that a person serves rarely is only punishing them, right? And when that person is a parent, that punishment is really felt by the entire family unit. We know that when a father is locked up, that it has a very difficult effect on that family. And in nitty-gritty terms, the family will lose income, it will increase their housing instability and their food instability, and a host of other things that will affect that father's partner and children. But we also know that when it's a mother that we lock up, that the effect is seismic. And when we choose to incarcerate a mother of minor children, her kids are 5 times more likely to go into the foster care system and to become the responsibility of the entire community than when we lock up a father. So again, I think it's important to weigh whatever we think the penalties should be for doing something illegal in the community against the cost of using a jail or a prison to correct those behaviors or those problems. The other important reason I think that we need to care about the women I did time with and about all these folks who are filling up our prisons and jails is because of racial and social justice. Now we know, history shows us, we know when we watch the news today, that not everyone in this country is treated in the same way by the criminal justice system. It's just a fact. You know, there was a time in this country when slavery was the law of the land, and the criminal justice system was used to enforce those laws. There's a time in this country when Jim Crow laws were put on the books to maintain racial hierarchies, and the criminal justice system was used to enforce those laws. Now, we have made enormous progress in this country on these fronts, but there is still work to be done to make sure that the criminal justice system is not being used as a tool of maintenance for racial hierarchy. The data shows us in black and white that disparate treatment exists at every stage in the criminal justice system. I'll share just one example with you. In this country, African Americans are at least 4 times more likely to be arrested for simple possession of marijuana than white people. Now, I really hope I don't need to point out to anyone in this room that white people smoke just as much marijuana as everyone else, because the data shows that really, really clearly as well. I know that there was a cannabis breakout on the agenda somewhere this week. I noticed that with interest. That should trouble us. We should expect that every individual person will be treated equally in a court of law. You know, it's hard to make a level playing field in all the different realms of our country and our world, but in our courts of law and in the criminal justice system that attaches to them more broadly, we should expect that every American can expect to be treated equally, because a system that privileges some people's safety and freedom over other people's safety and freedom is simply not a justice system. So, yeah. I just threw a lot of statistics at you. I'm going to talk a lot more about counties in 1 second. But when I think about these problems that face us, when I think about all of this data and these stats and many of these things, some of you know intimately if you're actively involved in your public safety departments back home, I think about people. I think about real people like Pom Pom. So Pom Pom was another young woman I came to know well. She also lived about 2 feet away from me. If Star lived right there, Pom Pom lived right there. But I got to know her well, not because of our physical proximity, but because she worked in the garage. And I worked as an electrician. Yeah, I am a somewhat competent electrician only by survival necessity. But I was not just an electrician, I was also the designated driver of the electric van. So I would drive the entire electric crew around the prison as we did the work of maintenance, which is how all prisons operate. So yeah, my prison license, very hard to get. It's not hard to get. I got to know those garage girls well, right? They gas you up, they fix your windshield wipers, you shoot the breeze, it's fantastic. Pom Pom was really shy though. She was a shy young woman in her 20s, her early 20s. And I was surprised one day when I was standing in the chow line waiting for lunch. Pom Pom was standing next to me, and she just started talking. And I was like, what is going on with Pom Pom? And she said, boss called me into his office today, meaning the correctional officer who supervised her in the garage. And I said, well, that can't be good. What did he want? And she said, well, he wanted to know if I ever had any family here. And I was like, okay, that's not a crazy question. We have 2 sets of sisters who are locked up with us right now. What about it, Pom Pom? Did you ever have family who was here? And she said, he asked me if I had a sister, and I told him that he must be thinking about my mom, because I heard that she was here once. And something about the way she said that made me ask, where's your mom now, Pom Pom? And she said, I have no idea. So Pom Pom's mom was addicted to drugs and had been in and out of her life, more out than in, for her whole life. And on that day, Pom Pom found herself not only in the same prison that had once incarcerated her mother, but working at the same job in the garage, working for the same guy. And she asked her boss, what was my mom like when she was here? I would like to know more about her. And he said, she never gave me any trouble. And then he asked Pom Pom why she was there. And I always wondered about that question. I felt like he should know the answer to that. Now, Pom Pom went home before I did. I was due to go to Halfway House in January, and she went home in November. And right before Christmas, I got a letter from Pom Pom, very sweet letter. And it said, hey, Piper, one thing you may not know is that people get nervous before they're going to be released, right? People are want their freedom, of course, but even I, who had so much more good fortune than most of the women I was incarcerated with, was scared about like this next chapter of my life and how I was gonna do post-incarceration. So in her letter, she said, Piper, you did the time, you didn't let the time do you, so just keep your head down and you'll be out of here in no time. Very sweet letter. And then she let me know a little bit about what was going on with her. She was sleeping on the floor of a relative who did not want her there. And she had gone home to one of the most dangerous parts of New Jersey. And she was afraid to go out of the apartment because there were gunshots and it was dangerous. She also didn't want to go out because it was cold and she did not have a coat. Thanksgiving had just come and gone, and there had been no Thanksgiving dinner for Pom Pom. And she said in her letter, I really miss you guys. I feel like you are my real family. And I read that letter sitting on my top bunk, and I cried. And I cried mixed up emotional tears because I was scared for Pom Pom and her future. And I was also angry that I knew that we can do better, right? I knew that a young woman should not feel safer in prison than out on the street. I knew that this system wasn't working. And I resolved when I came home to try and make sure that everyone understood how important Pom Pom is and how important all of those women that I did time with are. And so many of them have gone home and have done tremendously well post-incarceration, and I think that that's an important thing for folks to know too. All right, so I like to give props to the hero of the piece. This is my now husband, Larry, and this is me, and this is the day that I got out of prison, right? And I woke up in that awful triangular high-rise that I showed you earlier, and I knew that it was my out day, but no one in that facility had ever discussed my reentry with me, right? They hadn't discussed my release at all. In fact, they wouldn't confirm that they were gonna let me go. I was going a little bit bonkers. Still, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I watched the morning news. I watched Martha Stewart get released from prison. A helicopter got her, and I waited. And finally, at 11 o'clock, the correctional officer on the unit said, pack out, Kerman, and they sent me down to receiving and disbursement. And they said, hey, we don't have any women's clothes. So here are the smallest men's clothes that we have. Here is a windbreaker. It was March. It was Chicago. They said, here's $28. This is a gratuity. I said, thank you. And then they took me down in an elevator to an alleyway door, and they opened up the alleyway door, and they were like, see ya. And I was 800 miles from my home. And I was so lucky because that guy was waiting impatiently by the front gate with some women's clothes and with a ticket to take me home to New York. And I'm so grateful for that day, and I'm so grateful to that man. I think about that every day because I'm grateful for my husband. I think about it when I need to remind myself to be grateful for my husband. And I think about it because I know there are 700,000 people coming home from prison and jail in this country every single day. And I want to extend very, very heartfelt thanks to all of you who come from the counties, the 375 counties that have joined Stepping Up to help make sure that mentally ill people are staying out of prison as much as possible. And all of you who are doing so much work on reentry, because those 700,000 people are coming back to your communities, as you very well know. So here in Ohio, I just wanted to flag there's tremendous work being done right here in Franklin County. So talk to the Franklin County people about the amazing host of work. We are a Stepping Up, county, and they do fantastic work. There's a specialized program that focuses on women and helping women do better when they come out of the system. There's also 4 pilot programs doing groundbreaking probation work here in Ohio. And I have to say that I moved here 2.5 years ago. It's a wonderful city, but I was particularly impressed with the reentry focus here in Franklin County. This is one of the pages from the public safety website, and I strongly encourage you to go and check it out, because as a formerly incarcerated person, I looked at this website and I was like, this is exactly what every county hopefully can do or should do, because all of the questions that a person has are answered to the best of the county's ability, and they direct them towards the places and the people that they need to connect with in order to have a safe and a successful return home, right? I'm gonna talk quickly about the things that we need to fix. We need to fix sentencing. I know that those things come from state legislatures, but when you think about the players in your community who exert so much power and control over who goes to prison or jail, we're thinking about sheriffs, we're thinking about prosecutors, we're thinking about judges. You know those folks in your county. You need to do whatever you can to encourage them to be smart on crime rather than simply being tough on crime. If you've got any of those power players in your county who are simply tough and not necessarily smart, that's a place to focus on. Jail and court reform has gotten so much focus lately, and I'm very happy about that because counties need help with this. And that's why the MacArthur Foundation is spending $75 million on helping jails do a better job. And so check out those sites because they are doing fantastic work. Some of them are here today. That's why the Stepping Up program exists. Indigent defense, obviously one of the most important things that counties are delivering, sometimes all by themselves. I have to remind you all, if everyone in this country who is accused of a crime was able to have the quality of legal counsel and defense that I was able to afford, we would have far fewer people in prison and jail. Don't underfund indigent defense. It's a tough thing to fight for, but it is so important. If we actually met our Sixth Amendment, responsibility, our prisons and jails would look very, very different. And the final thing, if I was going to say, what are the things we should absolutely focus on, is kids in the system. This is both one of the biggest success stories in this country because we have vastly reduced the number of kids in juvie prison in this country all over the place. Some places more than others, but it's a big success story. And that's really important because the data showed us that if two young people committed the same offense and one of them was sent to juvie prison and one of them was held accountable in the community, guess which one was more likely to go forward, commit more crimes, and end up in the adult system? Right, the kid we put in juvie prison. So people started doing differently, and it's worked really well. However, what we see with many criminal justice reforms, and particularly around kids in the system, is that that exposes racial and socioeconomic disparity because most of the kids who are still stuck in the juvenile justice system are poor and disproportionately poor people of color. And that is something that we can all work to change. I want to thank you very much for your time and your attention. This is Shalonda, another of the women that I know from the Women's Prison Association in New York. And this is her beautiful family. And this is obviously like a really great day, right? Look at that smile. And for me, this is a really great day. I get to be here with you. I get to talk about these people and these questions that are very important to me, and I am very, very grateful. Because this is not my worst day, is it, right? This is not the day I carried that bag of drug money. And this is not the day that I was sentenced to prison or the day I started doing time, because those were bad days. And what I want for Shalonda and her family, and what I want for all those folks back in the counties who are struggling with these challenges, mental health, substance use and addiction, interpersonal violence, these are serious things. I want folks to be recognized not only for their worst day, but also for their best day. And so I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I hope you have a wonderful evening in my home of Columbus. Thank you.